Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blabbit. It's great to have you aboard our weekly podcast where we bring in experts from all different fields to give you their expertise, their insights, and some of the secrets, the things you need to know. For those of you tuning in for the first time, Blabbit, as we are known, is sponsored by Open Doors, which is your premier corporate platform for employee engagement. Get your employees talking, management listening, and let the magic begin. My name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking consultant and presentation specialist out of New York City. I work with individuals on making sure that the messages that they convey land with their audience and that they feel really good and confident about doing it. Hey, Glenn, good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name is Glenn Ingram. I've been working for years to help people ask better questions, maybe listen better, so they can be efficient solutions providers. Let's not talk about sales training. We don't need sales. We need solutions. Good morning, Sam. How are you?
Well, good morning, Glenn. I'm doing well. And it's thank you for having me on today. And I'll see what I can do to give Paul a case study of how not to communicate on the web. And I'm sure he'll have many, many helpful tips for me after the session.
Well, you know, Sam, you realize that really what we do here is have a conversation. That's all that it ever is. So your level of comfort is really our pleasure. That's what we enjoy. Tell everyone just a little bit about the work that you do and where your area of expertise is.
Okay. Well, guys, I have been working as a bankruptcy attorney in the Nebraska area. I'm born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, and have been doing this work for about 30 years now. And it's just something that I kind of fell into and discovered I really enjoy quite a bit. And, you know, when you tell somebody you're a bankruptcy attorney, it's kind of like telling people, you know, you're like a cancer doctor. They smile and they go, oh, it's like, you do that. It's like, and it's kind of a, you know, like I'm a mortician. I'm a cancer doctor. I specialize in, painful dental surgery. But bankruptcy it's an interesting topic, and it's an area where we deal with people constantly, just essentially just trying to figure out, you know, where they're at, what their financial issues are, and we try to come up with solutions to get them unstuck, because we get stuck in life where it's like, where do we go? What do we do? And we just try to help them to come up with an answer to that problem.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Sam. I was thinking, when people do come to see you, are most of them at the point where they've already thrown in the towel? In other words, that's it. I'm just going to cut my losses. And do you offer them other options? I'm assuming that you do, as much as you are a bankruptcy attorney and you want to help guide individuals through that process. There are probably quite a few options. Could you tell our audience just what some of the top options are?
I'll kind of go through that a little bit of how we analyze a new case and review things with a new client. Do they come in when they're ready to throw in the towel? You know, in some ways, yes. And everybody comes to that decision at different phases. I mean, some people, they come in the moment that the boss tells them that their job is going to be laying them off, they're in the door the next day with a 3-ring binder, color-coded, organized, and they say, okay, we need to do this because I know what's coming my way. Other people come in. Most people don't do that. Most people, when financial problems hit, when job layoffs occur, they'll say, well, this is temporary. I'll just use my severance pay. I'll start cashing in some of my 401ks. I'll borrow against my mortgage. I will, sell off some stuff and I'll start using my credit cards. And then they'll come to us at the point where they've tapped all those resources and they've reached a limit to where there's no more they can borrow, there's no more they can pay back, and then they come in. Some people come in after that. They come in after they've been sued and there's judgments and there's garnishments or foreclosures. So everybody comes in at a different time. And it just has much more to do with personalities, I guess, than anything else. But typically when a person reaches out to us and says, look, I think I need to chat with somebody about bankruptcy, then it's like, okay, let's figure it out. And we start off with a consultation where all I'm really trying to do is to outline the problem. And there's some questions I'll ask everybody to figure out, how deep is the water? How bad is it? And all I want to do at that first, appointment or phone call is to measure the type of debt they have, the amount of debt they have. And I want to figure out what are the solutions that might be available. And so it's after we kind of fill in some answers on some basic questions like, are you being sued? Are you being garnished? Do you have student loan debt? Have you filed your tax returns? Do you owe tax debt? Do you owe child support? Are you current or are you behind on it? What's your current income? How much is your car loan? And we start to factor in all of this. Once that I've collected those basic facts, then I can start to go to stage 2, which is to analyze, okay, what are the possible solutions to this problem based on those facts? And when that happens, some cases are pretty obvious. Somebody comes in and says, I didn't have health insurance. I'm making $15 an hour on my job. I decided I'd have a heart attack. I don't have insurance. I'm $100,000 in debt and they're garnishing my paycheck. What should I do? And my answer is you need to file bankruptcy because there's no way I can restructure a payment of $100,000 of debt. Some people come in and their cases there might be different solutions. And so then we start walking through what are the different solutions. And so the first solution we talk about is bankruptcy solutions, just so they know what they are. And so that your audience knows what those solutions are. Typically, bankruptcy comes in 2 forms for your average consumer case. And their choices are doing what we call Chapter 7, which is the most common type of bankruptcy filed. It's a process where we give the court a very detailed report on your financial picture on one day of your life. And we're going to give the court a list of all of the debts you owe and what type of debts they are, from student loans to child support to mortgage to car loans. Then we're going to tell the court about your current income and expenses. We're going to give the court copies of your paychecks for typically 6 months, 2 years of your tax returns. I'm going to pull your credit report. I'm going to search for lawsuits and judgments and public records. And we're going to put this picture together. And in Chapter 7, we filed this report with the court. About a month after your case is filed, there is a meeting with the bankruptcy trustee that reviews this report, and a trustee that will ask basic questions about your property and income. And the process is completed in roughly 3 months. So Chapter 7 is the most common type of bankruptcy filed. It's the least expensive way to file. It's what most people go with, and it's very powerful. You file it, you're done with it in 3 months. You're protected on day 1, and the court reviews your finances in your case for basically 3 months. Chapter 13 is the other way, and that's where typically your income is too high to qualify for Chapter 7. And so in those cases, the court says, look, you can't pay it all back. but you can pay some of it back. So pay what you can over a 3 to 5 year payment plan. Whatever is not paid off at the end of that plan is wiped out. So 7 and 13 get to the same destination. You become free of your debts, but Chapter 13 is a 3 to 5 year payment. Chapter 7, no payments, file it, you're done within 3 months. And these are the two most successful methods to get out of debt. But when I interview a client, that's the starting point. So these are your options in bankruptcy. But now let's review the other options, because in my experience, the way you decide whether you should or shouldn't file bankruptcy is based on whether other alternatives can work for you. And so other options might be credit counseling. Is it possible to enroll your debts in a good credit counseling plan where they consolidate your debts and pay them back? And the primary benefit of those plans, especially with the good companies, is they reduce your interest rates down to an affordable amount. And if the payment is affordable, that's an option. And there are people, I sit down and I say, look, your income is too high to qualify for Chapter 7. You're going to have to pay some of it back in Chapter 13. But here's an alternative for credit counseling. Your payment is going to be pretty much the same. So given that you can avoid bankruptcy and have the same payment, why not do credit counseling? And I've had clients do that, and that's a good solution. Other solutions, sometimes people are just living in too expensive of a lifestyle. Perhaps you acquired a house loan and car loan and camper loans and you name it while you were employed at the good job. But now you've been downsized, you've realized your income is lower. Okay, could we sell your home and downsize to a less expensive home? Could we trade in the car and get something that's cheaper to drive? Can we unload certain things? So sometimes it's an issue of just adjusting income, and that's very painful, because one thing you'll find is that nobody wants to give up the house or the car. That's a very hard thing. Yeah,
Sam, it's all painful.
It's all painful.
What you said about dentistry earlier was perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
and this is very insightful, but it literally is all painful. These situations, it's something you don't want to do. You have to do.
Exactly, and sometimes it's a situation where it's not so painful. Sometimes it's, hey, maybe we can refinance that house of yours. Maybe we can tap into your equity. And I think somebody just mentioned that on the chat.
Yeah, Lisa Dayford also said they almost when her husband lost her job during COVID, they narrowly avoided bankruptcy by financing their homes and doing a little other belt tightening, it looks like.
And that works. Another solution is sometimes debt negotiation might be the better solution. Now, generally, I disfavor debt negotiation. And I disfavor it because it's not enough to settle one or two debts. You have to solve all of the debts. And we'll kind of get into this and what's been happening in the credit counseling and debt negotiation industries. But from time to time, I'll look at a case and I'll go, look, we don't need bankruptcy. We don't need credit counseling. You have assets we can tap into. If you can come up with enough cash quickly enough, we can reach out to these creditors, call them up, explain what's going on, and just do a cash settlement. And that works for some people. I'd say probably about, maybe 90% or more of the people currently enrolled in debt programs, debt negotiation programs, are probably being scammed, and they're in a program that's never going to work. And we can explain why. But for some limited customers, debt negotiation is clearly the best option. Another option out there is what I call the self-help or what I call the Dave Ramsey option. And Dave Ramsey, if you know anything about consumer finance, is probably America's most famous money advisor. And I think for good reason. I actually think they put out a very good message. And he is a preacher of what they call the debt snowball method. And the debt snowball is where a person lists all the debts they have from highest to lowest. And the program is you make the minimum payment on each and every debt. And on the smallest debt, you double down and pay extra. And you pay that off. Then you move up the list to the next smallest debt. And one by one, you kind of get the snowball rolling in your favor. And as you see, the list of debts gets smaller. Emotionally, you're charged up, you're fired up, and you just kill the list. And that program works for people who have enough income to make the minimum payments. When you don't have enough money to make those minimum payments, that system doesn't work. And so it works for many. I think the Ramsey people have a very good, feel for what's happening out there. Many people are just trying to keep up with the Joneses. They're living too extravagant, a lifestyle. We're buying $5 coffees when, you can buy your 30 cents coffee. Yeah, that Glenn has. Amen. And so for the overspender, for the people who don't budget their money very carefully, when times get difficult, sometimes just old-fashioned paper and pencil, plan out your next paycheck and the one after that and the one after that. And with some discipline and guidance, those programs can work. And sometimes we do that too. It's like we just pull out the spreadsheets and we say, okay, this is a math problem. Let's figure it out. And so
now, you mentioned something early on there, Sam, that's been in the news a lot lately. So let's help everybody understand student debt loan and the ability to file bankruptcy against it.
I'm sorry, Glenn, if your business gets a loan.
No, I said student debt loan. Student debt's been in the news a little bit lately. And you mentioned student debts when you're looking at filing bankruptcy.
Yes.
So
student loans are absolutely the most difficult debt I work with. It is difficult because, back in the Bill Clinton era, they passed a law that said you may not ever discharge a student loan, whether it's a publicly guaranteed federal student loan or private loan, unless some horrible, horrible hardship applies to you. And that was a very hard standard. Prior to that change in the law, if a student loan had become more than 7 years old, we could actually discharge it in the bankruptcy process. But ever since that time, it's been something where almost nobody gets their debts discharged in bankruptcy on student loans because few people can show that the hardship is so bad as to allow it. And even those who can show it, to actually have the court review it, we basically have to sue the Department of Education and go through a trial and gather evidence. And that's a very expensive process that few people can afford. So it's very rare that there's any success in discharging it. It does happen, but it's uncommon. But what I see frequently is that what's easy to get in student loans are deferments. And right now, ever since COVID, I think our president has just deferred student loans once again until January 2023. You don't have to make payments. And it's easy to apply for deferments. So sometimes I'll sit with somebody who's like, approaching 50 years of age, and they've got, 50,000 of credit cards, and they say, or of student loans, and they're trying to decide, should you file bankruptcy? And it's like, I said, you can afford to pay your debts if you don't pay your student loans, but that's the one debt I can't wipe out. So maybe if we got rid of your credit cards, you could actually focus on paying the one debt I can't make go away. And so it is so common that right now, nobody's actually paying the student loans. It's not in their budget. But yet, if it were in their budget, all of a sudden they would face that money crisis and they would need to look at things like potentially filing bankruptcy or settlements or something. So it's a really twisted, evil debt. And it's a debt where, it's such a wicked thing. You've got young kids who are going to school and they meet all these cheery college counselors that say, you're going to have a great future and you're going to make so much money going to the Institute of Technical Studies or whatever factory they have. And very young, impressionable kids are signing up for what turns out to be, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they're coming out into the workforce and they can't earn the income to pay the debt. And so sometimes it's a debt we can address in bankruptcy. Frequently, it's a debt where it's a strong factor in deciding, what we do. Because in my initial consultations with clients, it's not just about how do we to solve this credit card debt. It's not just about, how do we protect the home, from late payments. You really have to look at the long term. You have to look at that person and say, how many more years do you have to retirement? And what's the goal? I mean, sometimes people have what I call Thelma and Louise retirement planning, where in that movie, you see at the end of it, they drive this wonderful convertible Ford Thunderbird right off the cliff because they don't want to get arrested and deal with all the consequences. And it seems like some people, I look at it, I go, are you actually going to own this house? Are you actually going to have money set aside in retirement? Or are you going to depend upon Social Security entirely? What's the long game? What's the goal? And I think for most people, the goal is actually pretty simple. Acquire a modest home and pay it off. Put some money in retirement so that, when your income goes down for that long retirement, you don't have to pay rent. You have a paid house, or you've saved up enough money to where there's a stream of income to pay your future expenses. Are we getting there? Instead, what people do is they focus on what's immediately in front of them. And they say, okay, I just have to get around this corner and I just have to solve this problem. And then I can save money. And if I get around that problem, then I can start to do this. And this is what I call around the corner thinking. And what happens is that you can spend 10 years or 20 years of your life just trying to get around the corner so that you can start to actually live a good life. And I think that type of thinking is very destructive. And you gotta live with that.
Isn't time truly the thing that you need to value? Because if you take good practices and you multiply it by the amount of time that you do it consistently, suddenly you achieve things that you never thought were possible. As you were saying, I'll get around to it. But if you just decide to do it and stick with it, it's amazing the way that time begins to compound good behavior.
It does. I mean, it's just a simple thing that you can't put off to tomorrow. If you're not doing it today, you're not going to do it. And, some people are just more naturally blessed with organization DNA than others. I mean, I'm a guy who starts off slow in my day, and as the day goes on, I get stronger and stronger, I guess. My wife is somebody who by 9 o'clock in the morning, she's got most of her to-do list checked off, and she's just a natural achiever and organized person. And so, I always joke with her. It's like, I know why I, was attracted to her. She was obviously this fantastically, beautiful and organized person. But then I look at her and I go, what is it you didn't have that you needed in me? Because I'm like disorganized and slow start and make it up as I go. That's just kind of how I go. But when it comes to finances, when it comes to figuring out, because what we're doing here is yes, we have a temporary problem to solve. We have debts in front of us that we need to overcome. But for so many people, it's not really a temporary problem. It's almost a lifestyle that nobody chooses, but we're locked in. And if you look carefully at this country, look what has happened with the job qualities in the last 30 to 40 years. When I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Omaha, and it was full of, we had like Omaha's famous for Omaha steaks and cattle, and I think our license plates say we're the beef state or something like that. And there are actually more cows in our state than people. And so in Omaha, they had these huge stockyards and just acres and acres of cattle in these stockyards, which would then be processed in all the meat processing plants in Omaha. And my grandfather had worked in such a plant for like 50 years. There were lines of trucks bringing cattle to Omaha that would stretch for miles and miles and miles. And there was a bar on every corner of that street. There were workers in my neighborhood who worked for Union Pacific Railroad, because Omaha is kind of the center of the country. And I think that's where the East and the West railroads met. And so there was all these people I grew up with who were blue collar workers who worked for the same company for decades. And at the end of it, they had a pension. They had healthcare programs. It was just the thing. Today's workers don't have that. It's so common today that we change jobs, every 3, 4, 5 years, you got a different job. You don't have the old-fashioned pension. The old-fashioned pension said, when you reach a certain age, you're going to get a monthly check for the rest of your life. How many people do you know who actually have that? It's rare. I mean, it used to be if you worked for the government, you'd get that. If you worked for a big corporation, you would get that. But even there, most big corporations give you 401ks. And the problem with 401ks is you can borrow against them, quite a bit, and you can cash them out. And so a lot of people should have big money in their 401k, but every time they change jobs, they say, well, I'm going to cash it out. I'm going to take this cash. I'm going to pay off my stuff, and I'm going to start up a new pension. And even government workers are switching to some type of a thrift savings plan or 401k plan or 403b plan, and they're not going to get a guaranteed payment for the rest of their life. So what's happening in this country is we're going through a situation where unless you have the skills given to you by your parents and your family and your neighbors to teach you how to be self-disciplined so that when you retire, you've got some money set aside, you've got equity in a house, that you're going to be okay going through what is increasingly an extended retirement, because, medicine is so much better. People, not uncommon to live into your 80s and 90s. My father's going to turn 89 here in a month, and it's like he's doing pretty good. And so if you retire at 60 or 65, you could be facing 30 years of no job income. And are we ready for that? The answer is no. And so when we sit down on these decisions, what should I do? How do I get out of this debt problem? Yes, it's about today, because I can set up a debt solution that gets you out of debt in 5 years. But that's 5 years that you have lost in achieving your retirement. 5 years that you have lost in paying down your mortgage. 5 years you've lost in saving up an emergency savings fund that all of us in theory should have, because every financial planner I know says part of your financial plan is to have 3 to 6 months of your living expenses in cash. So when you meet somebody with no cash, and I was just chatting with a 46-year-old gentleman today, no savings, no retirement, no cash on hand. He didn't really have a ton of debt, but he also didn't have a future because, quite frankly, that's a painful thing to look at. So we avoid it. And part of the process here is to get back to looking at the long term. Now, if you're a 25-year-old kid and you need to go through a 5-year program to get out of debt, fine, you can do it. When you're a 50-year-old, man or woman, and you're going to spend the next 5 years of your life paying off 40 grand of debt, but today you don't have any money in retirement, is it really a wise decision to dedicate the next 5 years of your life to just paying off debts? And it's going to vary from person to person, but a lot of times I look at this and I go, you need to get rid of these debts because you're way behind on the savings game. So that's a big factor. You can get out of debt, but you could have dedicated that money to paying off your student loans. You could have dedicated that money towards, other things which are equally important, because sometimes it's not a question, of whether you're going to pay stuff, it's who you're going to pay. You just reach that point where you're overextended. And the only question is, to which person are you going to break your agreement? Are you going to break the agreement you made to your kids when you promised them that you would be strong for them and provide for them? Because quite frankly, we do that. It's like, are we going to dedicate our time to paying credit cards and their 30% interest rates? Or are we going to dedicate our time to maybe putting some money aside so our kids, have a good school? And those are the emotional aspects that it just doesn't show up on paper. And so each person's different. And I guess I'm a little different. I like to take in a broader picture of who am I dealing with? What are their goals in life? Probably the most emotional ones is when you talk with a young lady in her 30s and maybe they're married or maybe they have a boyfriend, and you just get a feeling that when you talk with them, you get the feeling that, okay, I'm going to ask the question, if you were debt free, would you be having your second child? And that's when people get really teary and they go, yes, we want to have another kid, but we just don't think we can afford it. And at that point, it's like, it's an easy decision. You only get that chance once in your life. And, it's only once that you can have children who destroy your life. So by all means, go out there and have that difficult child. And
now, you know what, Sam? It sounds like if you do declare bankruptcy, you're actually serving two purposes. Number one, you're clearing out the majority of your debt, except for the student loans, but also you are making credit cards pretty much unavailable to you for a certain amount of time. So doesn't it actually serve, in terms of budgeting, two purposes?
It does. I mean, it's everybody approaches it differently. Some people just look at it as a strictly, money transaction. Some people, I would say most of the attorneys in our field look at these cases in terms of, okay, you called me with a problem, not really questioning whether, the bankruptcy is the right solution, or bankruptcy is even the number one issue. Because oftentimes the financial stuff is secondary to deeper issues. And I think you owe it to your client to dig into that. What is the deeper issue? And sometimes it is strictly financial. Sometimes it's just stuff happens. I had a client, super organized people, wonderful people. They had left the military and they thought that they had checked all the boxes to have health insurance going forward. And it didn't get checked right. And so the fella had no insurance. And then his wife had a recurrence of cancer. And he wound up in bankruptcy just because of an oversight. financially, these were the most organized, disciplined, good people ever. They didn't realize something. And so, but other people, there's something deeper going on. There's something behind the money issue. And that's what you have to kind of address if you want to be effective for your client, to steer them in the right direction. And I mean, some people are just married to people who are complete, they're just disasters. Okay. There's one client I recall, and her husband was a compulsive gambler. And if there was money in her purse, he'd find it. If she had a bank account, he'd get the ATM machine and he'd pull it out. If he found a checkbook, he'd write the check. And he was destroying her. And she was a successful nurse, made good money. And I just said, okay, you're going to stay married to this person? And she says, well, I do love him and he's a good guy, except for the fact that he's a horrible gambler. So I was like, okay.
Aside from the fact that he's an axe murderer, he's a great guy.
Aside from the axe murdering, but don't judge that until you know who they killed. Maybe the victim should have been axed. I don't know. Okay.
So wait a minute. Let me ask you this. What is
Come on,
the
Paul,
difference?
I've learned two important things. Most of us need to be able to say welcome to Walmart. And the reason I can't purchase a crystal ball is all the college counselors own them already. They have the market cornered on them.
Thank you for that, Glenn.
Just wanted to reiterate 2 prime points. Go ahead, Paul.
All right, let me ask you a really basic question, Sam. And that is there a difference between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 in terms of the length that a bankruptcy will stay on your credit report?
Yes, there is. And the answer is Chapter 7 stays on a credit report for 10 years. Chapter 13 will come off after 7 years. So some people say, yeah, Chapter 13 looks better. And generally in the lending industry, Chapter 13 is looked upon more favorably because you are paying something back. And so that part's good. Now, my personal take is the sooner you're done, the sooner you're done. The sooner you're out of bankruptcy, the sooner you can rebuild credit. And who would I rather lend money to somebody who just finished a 3-year Chapter 13, or somebody who 3 years ago filed Chapter 7, but in the past 3 years has done nothing but save money and build credit? And so it's a subjective thing. And so I always, my view on it is if you qualify for Chapter 7, go that way. Because and if, I have had clients who say, nope, I incurred this debt. I'm going to pay back what I can. I know I qualify for 7, but put me in a 13. And that's fine. I mean, and I respect that quite a bit. But generally speaking, Chapter 13 will look better on your credit. Now, bankruptcy itself is a public record, and that record never goes away. So even though, when I pull your credit, I might not see your Chapter 7 that you filed 12 years ago. But if I go down and check the public court records, I can see who filed 12 years ago. And credit reports are kind of a fuzzy topic because, there's credit reports and then there's credit reports. I mean, I think bankers know everything, and they're looking at reports which are not per se credit reports, but they're looking at your whole life and more and more and more, since we're all monitored by Google and the internet and all the stuff that goes with that. So there are alternative reports that bankers do view, but generally speaking, and here's an interesting one: what happens to your credit score with bankruptcy? And when we prepare a case, one of the first things we do is we pull your credit report, and we pull a specialized report that gives us TRW, TransUnion, Equifax reports, but it also has some special data in our reports that we obtain. And one of the factors on it is a predictive credit score. and they will tell us where they predict your credit score will be a year after bankruptcy. And actually, for most people, their score is higher a year after bankruptcy than on the day they file. And that seems counterintuitive. How would bankruptcy help my credit? Well, the number one factor in your credit score is your debt to income ratio. And so the more debt to income, the lower your score. Well, what happens when you file bankruptcy? Your ratio improves overnight. And so the benefit of that, getting rid of the debt on your debt to income ratio is so great that for most people, a year after bankruptcy, their score is higher. I've actually had bankers refer clients to me saying, I can't give this guy a loan. Take him through bankruptcy and I can. And so, which is weird, but it also makes sense, because after a person goes through a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, they're debt-free. They're not being garnished. Negative reporting stops, because that happens when you file bankruptcy. They stop reporting. And you can't file another Chapter 7 for 8 years. And so if I'm a banker, who would I prefer to lend money to? Somebody with a lot of debt who may file bankruptcy any day, or somebody who just walked out of the bankruptcy court with a discharge? I think a lot of bankers say, give us the guy who just cleaned up his credit. And can you get credit after bankruptcy? Well, depends on the kind of credit you're asking for. Typically, if someone files Chapter 7, shoot, halfway through the case, if their case is going well, you can walk onto most car dealerships and pick out your car, because the dealerships know you're better able to pay a debt after bankruptcy, and you can't file again for 8 years in Chapter 7.
Well, let me ask you another question about debt to income ratio.
Mm-hmm.
How do they determine income? Are the credit unions, do they have access to your tax returns,
Okay.
or is it based on information you provide?
You provide it. And that's the thing about credit reports. People are obsessed about credit scores and credit reports. And the longer I work in this industry, the less respect I have for credit scores or credit reports, because I think it's almost a con game that they've sold us. And we know that if you have a high credit score, you get lower interest rates and you can qualify to buy things. Okay, so that's what people are focusing on. And it's actually one of the most, upsetting questions I hear is like, well, what will this do to my score? It's kind of like saying, I'm a drunk, but can I buy liquor afterwards? It's like, that's really not the right question. I always tell people, focus on the cash score, not the credit score. How much cash do you have? I really don't care about your credit. But when you apply for any type of loan, a car loan, house loan, you're giving the banks a lot of financial information about you. You tell them where you work. You tell them your income and so forth. And creditors, the deal with credit reporting is the creditors share that information on your credit report. And so people ask me, it's like, well, how do they know where to garnish me? And I say, you told them. And I go look at your credit report. And people can get a free copy of their report by going to this website called annualcreditreport.com. And once a year, you can get a free copy. Seems like a lot of people use this Credit Karma app on their phone, which gives it to you as well. And I think you have to watch advertisements to have the app, but it works. If you look at your credit report, it probably says, your employment, where you've worked in the past, and maybe you're working there now. It doesn't tell me your income, but this debt to income ratio, which comes into your FICO score, your FICO score. And you can learn about that by going to a website called myfico.com. And they actually tell you how they score people. It's not that complicated. The biggest factor is how much debt to income do you have? And then other factors are you paying debts on time? And how much do you owe in debt versus how much could you owe if you maxed out all your credit? So if you don't owe much, but you could owe $1 million, then you're disciplined. But if your max credit is 50,000 and you owe 60, that's not good.
So basically, that's your credit utilization ratio.
Yeah, that's basically it. And it's a credit score ultimately is supposed to tell a banker, how risky are you? How likely are you to repay a debt? And the lower your score, so a low score is going to be in the 400s, a high score is going to be in the 800s. And it seems like everybody's trying to get their score over 700. That seems to be the goal. And it's there, but to me, there's only two times where you need to borrow money for sure. And that's typically when you're buying a house or buying a car. And even then, I'm getting to be old. I don't care anymore. It's just like car loans, and they all start and go. Some start better than others, but I can't say that I couldn't get where I was going because of my car. Usually, some days, but most days, I can make something junky work. To me, it's all about just getting a house loan, getting a decent rate, and paying it off. So I'm going to kind of share something with you that might be interesting or might be more boring stuff. And I'm very much into success rates, what works and what doesn't work. And so when I sit down with a client and I try to lay out their options, you have different options. What's going to work? What's not going to work? Okay. Most successful debt solution out there is Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And when I've gone through all the cases we have filed to see how many were successfully completed, we came up with a percent the last time I studied this of 99.9%. So that's off the charts. The only people I couldn't get through were people who refused to go to court. And there are some strange people who file cases and decide to run away and not go to court. And if you don't go to court, they do dismiss your case. And there's a small number of people where their income is kind of too high to get into Chapter 7, but our attitude is, well, let's find out. Let's file the case and let's see if they push back. And they do push back. But 99% success rate in Chapter 7.
That's awesome. Now I have a question. And I think it's something that I'm disappointed that no one ever taught in school. And maybe because when I was in school, we had so many people that had retirement incomes, pensions and things like that. And it was something that I was taught at a management training course when I was probably 27 years old. And I don't think most people understand this. Literally at 25, the model was if you put $100 a month into 401k from the time you're 25 to 35, and a model that at 35, if you start putting $1,000 a month in it, at 55, if you start putting $10,000 a month in it, literally you have more money to retire on. And back then, 20 some years ago, it was over $1 million just by putting $100 a month away from the time you were 25 to 35 and leaving it in that retirement fund. Why is no one taught this to plan? And maybe that's the reason why we are having a credit problem in our country. So a debt problem.
This kind of goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, where nobody has an old-fashioned pension. Because if you're going to go work for General Motors for 30 years, who cares? They're going to take care of it. You're going to get that pension for the rest of your life. But in this new era that we're in, where it's all on you, and if you had a good family teacher, good parents who taught you, or an uncle or an aunt or somebody, all right, you'll do fine. If your siblings are on the right track, you might goof around in your 20s, but eventually you'll get on the right track. But what you're saying is so true, and that the money you save earlier in your life counts so much more than what you contribute later. And there's something I do with young clients when I meet them, or with clients who, honestly, they just don't see a future. And it's just about, I just want this problem to go away. But there's kind of this dark cloud that hangs over them. And they don't see themselves winning in life. It's just about, all right, take the thorn out of my foot here so I can walk. So if I have a young kid, I'll ask them, It's like, all right, you're in your 20s. Would you like to be a millionaire when you retire? And of course, they just sheepishly smile and they go, well, sure. Yeah, I'd like to be a millionaire. Who wouldn't like to be a millionaire? And so I go, well, how much a paycheck would you have to save? How much a month would you have to save to be a millionaire? And they think about it. And I get answers like, I don't know, $1,000 a month? That's a good guess. And I said, I'll tell you what, you're in your 20s. You're going to retire in your 60s. You got 40 years. And, maybe you're paid every week, maybe every 2 weeks. And the answer can vary based on the performance of the stock market. But if you go back 40 years ago and had you invested a lousy $100 a month in the stock market, just broadly investing in like an index fund or something like that, especially in cases where your employer matches that contribution, you wind up with a tremendous amount of money. Can you be a millionaire on $100 a month? Yes, you can, depending on market results. I think over the past 40 years, our markets have done like 10 or 12% or something like that. And even if it's not a million, what if it's $500,000 or, that's still a lot of money. People don't understand the compounding of interest thing. And here's the deal. I think somebody once said that whether you think you're going to win or lose, you're right. And when I don't feel like my efforts are going to result in winning, what's going to happen to my efforts? It's going to go down. If you don't think that the system works, if you think you have to, occupy Wall Street and it's all corrupt and no matter what, you're going to lose, you're not going to put your efforts in it. You're going to, and this is what I see of too many people. They have not been properly coached and advised that you can win the game of money if you know the rules. Because once you know the rules and realize that $100 a month, $25 a week for 40 years is enough money to buy you a decent house and have cash in the bank and a new car in the parking lot, that's a great start. That's a great vision of the future. And once you understand that, I've seen people where it's like, you're kidding me. That's what $100 a month will do. That's what $25 a week will do. For some people, they hear that message and it changes them. And I said, the tricky part is self-discipline, because when you hit a rough spot, you're going to see that money in your 401k and you're going to say, I'm going to just take this out. I'm going to pay this bill and then I'll get back to it when I get around the corner. You can't do that. And if I were king of the country, I would ban all 401k distributions unless you had terminal disease. Then I'd give it all to you. But I just wouldn't let you withdraw. Until you have $250,000 saved up in your 401k, it should be illegal to pull money out, because even though you do have a legitimate short-term need, that's what life is. It's just nothing but short-term crisis after short-term crisis after short-term crisis. And a crisis to me might be, we need surgery. A crisis to one of my clients might be, my daughter needs high school pictures and it's $1,500. And I get it. On an emotional level, that's huge. But you have to, I think people have to see a future. They have to see success. And you have to I want people to leave the process saying, look, something happened, you hit a bad spot. But based on your age, based on the number of pay stubs left in your life, you can have a fantastically successful life if you follow these certain principles. And if you understand some important concepts like every dollar you put in a 401k is protected from creditors, unlike other bank accounts. And your 401k amounts are protected. Your pensions and any kind of a qualified retirement account is protected in bankruptcy. And so it might, for some people I meet, it's like they have chronic conditions. They have chronic medical conditions, and it's not going to be their last bankruptcy. So today we're going to clean up what health insurance didn't pay. But 5 years down the road, they're going to be back and we're going to have to do another case. And it's like, okay, that's how it goes. Knowing that, pay yourself first. Put money into your retirement first. Put money into your kids' college fund first. Pay down your mortgage first. And not to be a selfish person, but if you don't pay yourself first, nobody else will. And
Yeah. If you don't watch out for yourself or take care of yourself, like you said, no one else will. That's been a great show, Sam. The time has flown by again. Thank you very much for joining us. If anybody would want to reach out and maybe ask you some questions or contact you directly, what's the best way to do so?
Well, probably the best way to reach me is to email me. It's not how we all work. And you can reach me. We have a website at samturcolaw.net. You can email me at sam.turco@samturcolawoffices.com. Or you can pick up the phone and call us at 402-614-7171.
Awesome. Well, thank you a lot, Sam. We appreciate you sharing a lot of this insightful information. May not have been the most exciting to some people, kind of like talking about cancer, but definitely information that people could probably use.
Very good. It's been fun, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, these are definitely things that we need to hear. So really fascinating, Sam. Great show.
Thank you, guys.
All right, everyone. We're going to have a reel next week for the holiday, and then we'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks. Same time, same channels. Take care, everybody.